Let me tell you about a boy and 80 hives and a single card clipped to a sun-bleached box. The card was small, laminated in clouded plastic, the corners gone soft from years of handling. On the front, in a child's blocky printing that had grown steadier over the seasons, it read, Hive number 7. Queen line, third daughter of the first swarm. Established the spring the boy was 3 years old. Below that, a column of dates and honey weights going back 12 years, written in 2 different hands. The older hand careful and slanted, the younger hand learning to copy it. The boy was Mateo Reyes, and he was 15 years old, and on a Tuesday morning in late May, he was up before the sun cleared the mesa. The way he was every morning, the bees were flying, because the desert gives you maybe 2 cool hours before the heat sits down on everything, and the bees turn mean. The land was quiet that time of morning. The juniper and the mesquite held the last of the night's coolness, and the seep at the bottom of the draw made its small wet sound that you could only hear before the wind came up. This was Grant County, New Mexico, the high desert country east of Silver City, where the ground is the color of a clay pot, and the only green is the green that knows how to wait for water. Mateo walked the hives the way his grandfather had taught him, in a fixed order, never skipping. Because a beekeeper who skips a row is a beekeeper who finds a dead colony 3 weeks too late. He started at the home yard near the orchard, where 40 boxes sat on cinder block stands in 2 long rows. He listened at each one before he looked. A healthy hive has a sound, a low even hum like a refrigerator in another room, and Mateo could hear trouble before he ever lifted a lid. He moved down the row, hive by hive, reading the cards clipped to each box, checking the dates, his lips moving slightly as he counted. Then he walked the half-mile down the draw to the seep yard, where the other 40 hives sat closest to the water and the blooming desert willow, because that was where the forage was richest in May, when the willow and the mesquite flowered together, and a strong colony could put up 40 pounds of honey in 3 weeks, if the rains had been kind. He came around the big juniper at the head of the draw and stopped. There were stakes at the seep, not his stakes. His markers were short cedar pegs with a hive number burned into the top. These were tall lath stakes, the kind a surveyor drives, each one trailing a length of bright pink plastic ribbon that snapped a little in the early breeze. There were 4 of them, set in a line that ran right across the lip of the seep, right through the muddy edge where the bees came down to drink, and where the desert willow grew thickest. He had not put them there. He had been at the seep yard 6 days ago, and the stakes had not been there then. Mateo crouched beside the nearest stake. He did not touch it. He looked at the pink ribbon, at the lath, at the way the stake had been driven clean into the soft ground near the water. He looked at the other 3, marching off across the seep toward the open mesa to the west, where for the past month he had heard the heavy machines working, the diesel growl of dozers and the backup beepers carrying for miles in the dry air. He looked at the bees already moving in the willow above the stakes, working the flowers the way they did every May, knowing nothing about pink ribbon or property lines. He looked a long while at the stake driven through the muddy edge where the bees came to drink. He looked at the way the willow leaned out over the water, heavy with bloom, the same willow his grandfather had pointed to when Mateo was small and said, "That tree feeds half the yard in May." He looked at the seep itself, dark and patient at the bottom of the draw, the one reliable water in a mile of dry ground. A boy who did not understand what he was seeing might have pulled the stakes up and thrown them in the mesquite and gone on with his morning. Mateo did not understand it yet either. Not all of it. But he understood one thing his grandfather had drilled into him before he was old enough to lift a full super of honey. When something you don't understand shows up on the land, you do not touch it, and you do not guess. You write it down, and you find out who put it there. He stood up. He walked back up the draw to the house, and he got the box. Not a notebook, the box. The old tin honey extractor box where his grandfather had kept everything that mattered, and where Mateo kept it still. It was heavier than it looked, and he carried it down to the seep in both hands, the way you carry a thing you cannot afford to drop. But that's not what this story is really about. Not yet. To understand why a 15-year-old boy walked to a tin box instead of to a telephone, you have to understand what was in the box, and who had put it there, and why a handful of pink survey stakes by a desert spring meant more than they looked like they meant. A note for you, before we go on. The desert willow that Mateo's bees were working is not a true willow at all. It's a small flowering tree of the dry southwest, and it blooms in late spring with pink trumpet-shaped flowers that bees and hummingbirds love. In high desert beekeeping, the whole year can turn on a few weeks of bloom like this, when mesquite and desert willow flower together near a reliable water source. A spring, a seep, a stock tank. Water in dry country isn't just water. It's the thing that decides whether the bees survive the summer at all. Part 2. Now here's what you need to understand about the box. Mateo's grandfather was named Mateo Reyes, and he started the apiary in the spring of 1993 on 80 acres of dry mesa land that had come down through the family and that nobody else had wanted because it grew nothing but creosote and rock and a single spring-fed seep at the bottom of a draw. Tomas was a practical man. He looked at that seep and the mesquite around it, and he did not see worthless land. He saw forage. He saw water. He saw a place where bees could live. He brought in his first 3 colonies in boxes on the back of a flatbed, and he set them near the water. And the first of those 3 was the colony he numbered Hive 7, because he was a superstitious man in small ways, and 7 was the number he wanted his luck to live in. That colony threw a swarm the second spring, and the swarm's daughter Queen headed a new hive, and her daughter headed another. And within 10 years, Tomas had 80 colonies and a reputation in 3 counties for mesquite honey, so pale and clean that the restaurants in Silver City bought it by the case. Tomas died when Mateo was 8 years old. The boy remembered him in pieces, a pair of brown hands working a hive tool, a voice saying gently, gently, they can smell that you're afraid, and the particular smell of the extracting shed in August, wax and smoke and warm honey. Most of what Mateo knew about his grandfather, he knew from the box, because Tomas kept records the way some men keep faith. In that tin box, he kept his brand registration and his beekeeper's permits, his seasonal yield ledgers going back to 1993, a date and a weight for every hive, every season in his careful slanting hand. He kept hand-drawn forage maps, the seep at the center, the bloom corridors marked in colored pencil, the foraging range of each yard drawn as a soft circle 1.5 miles across. And he kept the paper that mattered most, though Mateo would not understand how much it mattered for years yet. A stockwater and forage easement that Tomas had filed in 1994 with the state land office. A legal right to the use of the seep and the surrounding forage on the strip of state-leased mesa that bordered his land on the west. Tomas had understood something most people never think about. The seep itself sat right at the edge of his 80 acres, but the mesquite and desert willow his bees foraged spread out across the state land beyond his fence. So he had done the careful thing. He had hired a surveyor in 1994, a man named Arturo Salas, to locate the exact corner where his property met the state lease, and to set a brass monument in concrete at the seep, and to record the easement that protected his right to the water and the bloom. Salas's field notes were stapled to the back of the easement document, the measurements, the bearing, the description of the monument, the witness rocks he had marked, the date and the weather. A careful man's record of a careful morning's work, sealed in a tin box for 30 years. Mateo's mother, Elena, had kept the apiary going after Tomas died. She was not a beekeeper by trade. She worked at the hospital in Silver City, but she kept Dolores Vance on retainer, the way Tomas had. Dolores was a retired county extension agent, a range conservationist who had advised the Reyes apiary since before Mateo was born, who knew the easement law in the forage country and the difference between a strong colony and a doomed one at 50 paces. And Elena taught Mateo the box. At 5, he carried water to the hives in a coffee can. At 8, the spring his grandfather died, he started keeping his own cards, copying the old man's system letter for letter. By 15, he had a card on every one of the 80 hives and a yield ledger in his own hand that picked up exactly where Tomas's left off. He had also been watching the mesa to the west for 2 years, and he had been writing down what he saw. Ridgeline Solar Partners. The sign at the locked gate said they had leased 6,000 acres of the state mesa, and they meant to cover it in panels. Year 1, Mateo heard the survey crews and saw the flagging go up along the far ridge. Year 2, the dozers came, and the creosote flats west of his fence went from gray-green to bare-graded dirt, mile by mile, the dust rising above the tree line every afternoon. He had photographed it from his fence with a disposable camera and stapled the prints into a folder with dates on the back, the way his grandfather would have. And he had marked on Tomas's old forage map how close the clearing was creeping to the bloom corridor and to the seep. And now there were pink stakes in the seep itself. He called Dolores Vance that Tuesday before the heat came up. She answered on the second ring. He told her about the 4 stakes and the pink ribbon and where they stood. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "Don't touch them. Photograph every one. The stake, the ribbon, the ground around it, and enough of the draw to show where it sits. Get the date on the pictures. I'll be there within the hour." And then she said the thing that turned a strange morning into the start of everything. She said, "Mateo, get your grandfather's box, get the easement, and get the maps." And that's when everything changed. A note for you. In the dry West, water rights and easements are some of the oldest and most fiercely protected law on the books, older in many places than the states themselves. The principle is called beneficial use. The idea that a right to water belongs to whoever has actually, continuously used it, and can prove it. A spring you've watered stock at for decades. A seep your bees have foraged season after season, documented year by year. That recorded continuous use can outweigh a newer claim on paper, which is exactly why an old man's habit of writing down a honey weight every single season turned out to matter more than anyone could have guessed. Part 3. Dolores Vance came up the ranch road in a dusty truck within the hour, with her own camera and a handheld GPS and 30 years of forage country behind her. She was a small, unhurried woman who stood still and looked at a thing for a long time before she said anything, and Mateo had been watching her do it his whole life. She walked the seep with him without talking much. She photographed each pink stake from 3 angles. She knelt at the lip of the water and looked at the bees coming down to drink between the stakes. And she looked west across the bare graded mesa where Ridgeline's machines sat quiet for the morning. And she stood still for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Mateo, read me the card for Hive 7, the oldest one." He had brought the box down to the truck. He opened it and found the card, soft-cornered, the plastic gone cloudy. He read his grandfather's first entry and then his own. Established spring 1993, set at the seep yard. And then the honey waits, season by season, 30 years of them. A number for every single year in 2 hands that were really one hand teaching another. Dolores said, "How many years of records does that seep have?" He counted, 30 seasons, 1 ledger entry every year since the apiary began, every one of them anchored to the water at the bottom of that draw. She nodded slowly. She looked at the stakes again. She said, "These were driven by someone who thinks this ground belongs to them, or might, and the only party clearing in that direction is Ridgeline." Mateo said the seep was inside his grandfather's fence, on the easement. She said, "That's what the paper says." Then she said, "Get me the easement and the original survey." And he brought her the document with Arturo Salas's field notes stapled to the back, and the hand-drawn forage maps. And she spread them all on the tailgate of her truck beside a printout of the county's current GIS parcel map. And she weighted the corners with her GPS and her coffee thermos and a coil of flagging rope. She looked at the 2 maps for a long time. The old hand-drawn one with the brass monument at the seep, and the modern county map with its crisp computer-drawn boundary lines. She put one finger on the old survey line and one finger on the new GIS line, and she traced them both. She said, "These don't agree." Mateo asked by how much. She said, "At the seep, 60, maybe 70 feet. The county's map shows the state lease boundary running 60-some feet east of where Arturo Salas set that monument in 1994. Which means the county map puts the seep and your easement on the wrong side of the line, on Ridgeline's side." He asked which map was right. She said, "The 1994 survey was done by a licensed man with a brass monument in concrete. The county map is traced from old aerials and satellite data. It has a margin of error, but Ridgeline is operating off the county map. They think the seep is theirs." So she got on the phone. And on Friday morning, a land surveyor named Ray Begay drove up the ranch road with his equipment in the truck bed and 20 years of New Mexico boundary work behind him. He was a quiet man who asked a few careful questions before he started, and many more after. He wanted the 1994 survey, the field notes, and the location of Arturo Salas's monument. Mateo took him to the seep and to the spot at the lip of the water where his grandfather had always said the corner was, near the base of the oldest desert willow. Ray cleared away 30 years of leaf litter and washed down silt with his hands in a small trowel. 2 inches down, under 3 decades of the draw's slow burial, his fingers found concrete. He brushed it off. Set into the top was a brass cap, green with age but readable. He read it out loud. Salas, 1994. He looked up at Mateo. He said, "This is your corner, right where the old notes say it is." They worked the line for 2 days. Ray located the monument, tied it into his GPS, ran the bearing Salas had recorded, and checked it against the county's digital parcel data. And the truth came up out of the ground exactly the way the brass cap had. The boundary was off. Salas's monument and Tomas's easement were precisely where the 1994 survey said they were, and the county's computer map was wrong, drifting 63 feet eastward at the seep and narrowing back to nothing a quarter mile to the south. Ray traced the error to its root, and the root was almost laughably small. During a county GIS modernization project in 2004, the old paper plat maps had been scanned and traced into the computer by hand, and somewhere along that western boundary a technician's cursor had drifted a few pixels, and over the length of the line that few pixel slip had compounded into 63 feet of phantom land. 63 feet. A data entry mistake from 20 years ago, made by someone who never saw the seep, never saw the bees, and would never know what it almost cost a boy. And that error was the only thing standing behind 4 pink stakes in a spring. Ray set down his trowel. He looked at the brass monument, and at the hive cards in the open box on the tailgate, and at the bare mesa to the west where ridgeline had cleared right up to what it believed was its line. He said, "I need to call this in. A note for you. The work Ray Begay did has a plain name, a boundary retracement survey. When a recorded monument can be physically recovered in the ground, it almost always outranks a line drawn later from aerial photos or satellite data because the monument represents the original legally controlling survey. Surveyors have a saying, the corners are where the original surveyor set them, not where a later map guesses they are. A brass cap 2 inches under the silt can quietly overrule a whole county's computer. Part 4. The State Land Office sent 2 staff out in June. They spent 2 days on the western boundary. They recovered Salas's monument at the seep, the same one Ray Begay had found, and confirmed its position. They tied it into the state survey network. They pulled an aerial photograph from 1995 that showed the apiary in its 3rd season. The white hive boxes visible as small bright squares in 2 neat rows by the water. And the seep sat plainly inside the Reyes easement, right where the brass cap said it should. They cross-referenced everything. And they reached the same conclusion Ray had. The error had entered the county database in 2004, during the digitization project, when a hand-traced line slipped 63 feet along the boundary. The state issued a boundary correction order in July. The parcel database was updated, and Ridgeline Solar Partners pulled their 4 pink stakes out of the seep and rerouted the western edge of their array to clear the easement by 100 feet. They did not fight it. Mateo only learned why secondhand, weeks later, through Dolores, who had spoken with Ridgeline's land manager after the order came down. The man had told her, "We looked at the records. The boys got 30 years of dated honey weights tied to that water, and the brass monument backs every line of it. That's not something you argue against. There was no triumph in it, no scene where the corporation was made to apologize, no moment where Mateo got to stand in front of the men in trucks and tell them they'd been wrong. There was just a correction order in the mail and 4 stakes pulled from the mud and the bees going down to the water the way they always had, knowing nothing about any of it." Dolores told him the news on a Thursday afternoon at the seep yard, which was his regular afternoon in the hives. He was reading the cards, checking the dates, the way he did. He stood at Hive 7 for a while after she told him. He thought about his grandfather, about Tomas standing at this same seep in 1993. 34 years old, setting down 3 colonies on land nobody wanted, hiring a surveyor in 94, and paying for a brass monument and a recorded easement because he understood that in dry country you do not own water by wanting it. You own it by proving you have used it year after year in writing. Tomas had been a young man when he started, planning for a future he might not see, and he had not lived to see this. He had died at 59, with the apiary at its peak, and the box on its shelf and the records all in order, trusting that whoever came next would know what the box was for. He thought about Arturo Salas in 1994, kneeling at this same spot, mixing concrete in a bucket and setting a brass cap into the ground at the edge of the water, because a physical monument in the earth was how you proved what you held after the man who drew the map was gone. Salas was surely an old man now, or gone himself. His monument was still in the ground. It had waited 30 years in the silt for the one morning it would be needed, and then it had spoken. Mateo took a fresh card from his shirt pocket. He wrote the date at the top, the way Tomas had taught his mother, the way she had taught him. He wrote the season's first honey weight for Hive 7, and below it, he wrote one more line that was not a weight and not a date. The only line in 30 years of ledgers that was neither. He wrote, "Seep held," 2 words. Then he clipped the card back onto the box and walked the rows, touching the hives as he passed. The oldest ones his grandfather had set, and the newer ones he had built himself, and the empty stands where next spring's swarms would go. The afternoon heat was coming down on the mesa now. To the west, past the fence, the graded ground of Ridgeline's array ran flat and bare to the horizon, panel after panel catching the hard light. But here at the bottom of the draw, the desert willow was still in bloom, pink trumpets nodding over the water, and the bees were working it the way they had worked it for 30 springs, and the seep made its small wet sound under the hum. Mateo crouched at the lip of the water beside the brass cap his grandfather's surveyor had set before he was born. He brushed a little silt off the green metal with his thumb so the lettering showed. Then he stood, and he picked up the box, and he carried it back up the draw toward the shed the way you carry a thing that matters, in both hands so you don't drop it, and clipped to the side of that box, soft-cornered, the plastic gone cloudy with handling, was a single card. Hive number 7, Queen Line, 3rd daughter of the first swarm, established the spring the boy was 3 years old. 30 seasons of honey weights in 2 hands that were really 1 hand, teaching another across the years. He had work to do in the morning. A note for you. There's a quiet lesson in how this ended, and it's worth naming once. Power in these stories usually looks like equipment and money and official-looking maps. But the thing that actually decided it was the least glamorous habit imaginable. An old man, and then a boy, writing down a single honest number every single year and keeping it in a box. Documentation isn't exciting. It's slow, and it's dull, and it asks you to believe that the work you do today might only matter to someone 30 years from now, which is, in the end, the same kind of faith it takes to plant a tree or set a hive in country that doesn't make anything easy.